Earlier this summer, in this particular raised bed, I had one of my junior gardening friends, Mr. J.D. Prater of Stillwater, help me in spacing out a garden and figuring out square footage. And if you recall on that particular segment, he was helping me measure out the garden, and I asked him to put a couple of seeds in the planting hole, and of course he was putting in a fistful of seed. Well, sure enough, with a little bit of extra thinning, we were able to get some plants here. Now, they may not look very attractive to you, but sure enough, they're really serving their purpose, and they're going to be very productive for us. And this is a mustard plant that we've let go to bolt because we're growing it for the actual seed. Now, mustard, as far as the cooked mustard greens, is a little bit different cultivar. This particular cultivar is a brown mustard seed cultivar. And you can see we're getting some reseeding where the growth is coming back up, but it's a cool season plant. We put the seeds in the spring, early spring, and as they begin to grow, we let them go ahead and grow and flower, and they have a nice delicate yellow flower, and then the flowers will pollinate and then turn into these seed pods, and these are very dry, and if you don't harvest them in time, sure enough, they'll shatter, and you can see little seedlings starting to come up, so we'll get a fall crop as well. With it being a mustard family, it's going to have some of the same problems with the cabbage loopers and some of the moths flying around, and so we've had to keep an eye on them. But we also had a few problems with the harlequin bug. In one book that I read about the harlequin bug described it as a stink bug dressed up to go out on a Saturday night because it's got some real brilliant colors, kind of a yellowish orange and black color, but it still does the same damage. It pierces the foliage and the seed pods even, and it sucks the plant juices out, so it can have an impact detrimentally. But there's a lot of cultural things by just picking them off by hand, or also you can use some organic products like rotenone and sabadea, and as a last result maybe 7 or thiodiane if you really get a devastating problem. But this particular one, again, is very specialized, and as it first starts to come up, you can harvest the young greens, but we were able to find the brown mustard seed cultivar from Shepherd's Garden Seeds. And let me show you here, Alan's taken some of the seed pods, which you can see here that are dry, and he's shredded those, and you can see the actual mustard seed. So by now you've probably figured out that this is grown to make mustard. So again, let's join Barb in the kitchen and get the scoop on how to make the recipe one that you might really pucker up to as well.
I have really been pleasantly surprised with what I've been doing playing with the mustard seed. I thought, well, gee, anybody can go into any grocery store and buy 10 different kinds. Why would you want to play with it yourself? But I found that there's a lot of things you can do with just a little bit of creativity, changing the ingredients just small amounts, and because it's something that's refrigerated and not canned, there's not that kind of a safety factor involved, and it'll keep up to 2 years once you get it done. You want to still make small amounts because it deteriorates in flavor fairly quickly, but it will keep for a long time without spoiling. What we have basically are 3 different kinds of seeds here. These are the ones that were grown in the garden that you saw out there with Steve. This is a black mustard seed here, and this is a yellow. Now this one's also called white, this one's also called brown. The yellow or white is used primarily in the ballpark mustards that most of us are familiar with hot dogs, and the black has got a little more pungent and a little more spicy, and it's used in Chinese and fresh mustards where you get a little bit more of a nip to them than some of the things most of us are a little bit more familiar with. Now in order to make this mustard that we're going to work with today, it's several steps in the process, but it's fairly easy. I'm going to start with 1/3 cup of mustard seed from the garden and 1/4 cup of mustard powder. Now when you use mustard powder, you want to start with cold water, in part because the flavors will deteriorate. You'll lose a lot of the flavor very quickly if you start with hotter water, and also because it will lump on you if you use hot water, whereas with cold you'll be able to stir it together fairly easy. Now this is going to sit for 3 hours. And I've done one of these ahead of time. Now it will congeal on you or set up on you, so don't be surprised with that. It's going to come out to be fairly thick when it's done because of the thickening power of the mustard itself. Now once that 3 hours is just about over, you can come out with the second step of this. We're going to use, and here's where the creativity comes in. The recipe I'm using uses 1 small onion, 2 tablespoons of packed brown sugar, a teaspoon of salt, 1 to 2 cloves of garlic that have either been minced or pressed. Now this is all going to be strained out, so don't worry about chopping the onion real fine or pressing the garlic. Minced will be fine also. Then we have 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon. And some of the ingredients on this surprised me also. This will be a German type of mustard. 1/4 of a teaspoon of allspice, 1/4 of a teaspoon of dill seed, 1/4 of a teaspoon of dried tarragon, and then something most of us are familiar with pickles and with mustard that we're most commonly seeing, that's turmeric. It's what gives most mustard its bright yellow color. We've added 1/8 of a teaspoon of that. Now into that I'm going to add 1 cup of cider vinegar. Now because of the vinegar, you want to use a pan that's either glass or stainless steel or enameled, not aluminum or iron, because those will corrode real quickly for you. This is going to come to a boil, and then reduce the heat and let it simmer for 10 to 15 minutes so that you have a chance for the volume to decrease by about half. You can see that the mustard seed really does gel or solidify after it's soaked for that 3-hour time period, so that you really have something that's solid here. We're going to put this into a blender now, and you can use a food processor if you have one of those instead. Now the mustard flavor, the pungency, is going to develop in part based on a couple of things. One is whether you use hot liquids or cold liquids. Thus far we've only used cold liquids in combining this, so the flavor is going to be fairly strong. Now if you want to soften it, you use hotter liquids, and we will do that shortly. Now we also have the ingredients that we boiled down to about half, and we're going to strain those out using a metal strainer. We won't need those anymore, or the solid parts, the onions and whatnot. We've got the flavors from them that we need. Now this you're going to blend. It's going to depend on how much you want the seeds pulverized as to how long you do this. Another thing that will make the difference in the flavor and how sharp it is or how strong it is how much the seeds are broken up. And the more you break them up, the stronger the flavor will be. But if you leave a lot of seeds whole, then as people bite into them, they're going to get a really strong burst of flavor at that point in time, so it will seem very, very hot. So this part is personal preference. You blend it as long as you think you want to until it looks like you think it will taste good. Now, some of you may choose to blend it a lot longer than that. At this stage, it goes into the top of a double boiler, and we're going to cook it for 10 to 15 minutes until it starts to thicken up. But don't cook it until you think it's as thick as you would like it to be, because it will thicken up a little bit more as it cools down. Once your 10 or 15 minutes is over on the simmering water bath, go ahead and take it off. It'll be about the thickness that you like, but it will cool down a little bit more. You will notice that I've used a metal spoon this time instead of usually when I cook to protect the pans I use plastic or wooden. However, the turmeric is such a permanent stain that I don't want to stain my equipment for the rest of its life, so I've gone ahead with metal. You may also want to be real careful with the clothing that you're wearing and your countertops and so on. Now to this you can add 1 to 2 tablespoons of honey. This will cut the heat a little bit, so that if it's a little bit spicier, you can add a little bit more. You can put more in later on once you use it. You will need to let this sit for probably at least 3 days after it has been finished, so that flavors have a chance to blend. I'm using a canning jar because it's going in hot, but you don't need to worry about headspace because it's not going in the freezer nor into a water bath canner. And as I said, you need to put it in the refrigerator, and it will keep somewhere close to 2 years. For Oklahoma Gardening, this is Barbara Brown.